Joe Rogan has been the subject of a lot of scrutiny recently, and that kind of comes with the baggage of having the #1 podcast in the entire world. This is primarily because recently he's taken a more right-wing stance on vaccination, and as a result, literally an entire board of 270 doctors wrote a letter to him to try to get him to change his ways. Now, before we get to the content, this is like a new channel that we're trying to develop, so to incentivize you guys to subscribe and turn on our notifications, we're giving away $500 to any subscriber that has our notifications on. And if you could take a minute to leave a like on the video, I'd appreciate that as well. So about a week ago, Ethan Klein of H3H3 Productions mocked Joe Rogan for fueling vaccine hesitancy. He literally tweeted out, "Joe Rogan, who lives on elk meat, egg yolk, and human growth hormone with lungs full of tar, thinks he's healthier than everyone. This motherfucker is such a bitch that when he got COVID, he quote unquote threw the kitchen sink at it. If you're so healthy, just ride it out like you say a man should. Dude has caused so much vaccine hesitancy and misinformation, and he doesn't even have the balls to stand by the shit he preaches. Now he's on his show talking about how fat people should just die of COVID. Dude is such a piece of shit. Instead of getting vaccinated, he takes Regeneron, an experimental drug that was developed alongside mRNA vaccines. His logic makes no sense, and then he credits ivermectin, which does nothing for COVID. Not to mention whatever the f is an Alpha Brain. For those of you guys that don't know, Alpha Brain is Joe Rogan's supplement that he promotes, but Ethan wasn't done there. Ethan then accused Joe Rogan of having a double standard when it came to his criticism of big pharma companies and the COVID-19 vaccine. Meanwhile, Joe is on a big pharma conspiracy against vaccines. Someone needs to ask him who makes ivermectin and Regeneron and all the other he took when he had COVID. My personal favorite take to this is literally what Michael Malice tweeted, saying that the narrative has gone overnight from Joe Rogan is irrelevant ever since he went to Spotify to Joe Rogan is causing genocide by explaining what medications he took that successfully allowed him to beat COVID in record time. And honestly, the way Ethan was memed for this was absolutely hysterical. There's this one tweet where Ethan literally took his shirt off and put it on Joe Rogan and photoshopped his hat on him as well to make it seem like they both had the same body type, because everyone was making fun of how Ethan looked afterward, because Ethan is just not known for being the most healthiest human being. So as of now, I don't think Joe Rogan has directly responded to Ethan. And for all you know, Ethan could be just looking for some controversy to stir up, because if Joe Rogan does name drop Ethan, then it could result in more traffic for Ethan. Personally, I'm not a regular listener to the Joe Rogan Experience. I do periodically listen whenever he has a guest I like. The last guest I really listened to was when he had Derek from moreplatesmoredates.com, primarily because they were talking about a bunch of stuff that I was into, stuff that pertained to fitness and lifestyle, etc., etc. There were some COVID discussions in that podcast episode, but to be honest, there's this one misconception that people have when it comes to Joe Rogan and his show, at least for the one episode that I did watch, where it seems like Joe Rogan is telling his viewers, hey, if you take the vaccine, you're an absolute idiot. You should take ivermectin and Regeneron instead. At least from my perspective of things, whenever I would listen to the Joe Rogan Experience, he said he personally has some reservations against the vaccine. He is just very skeptical about the government in general, and this could all be as a result of a horrible experience that he's had living under a left-wing government when he was in California. Now, granted, California has had stricter restrictions during this entire pandemic, which was so bad that it resulted in Elon Musk and Joe Rogan and some other people picking up and moving to Texas. And Joe Rogan, as a result, absolutely loves Texas. So obviously, as a result, a man who was initially more center-leaning is starting to lean a little bit more to the right wing. But there was never one point where I listened to Rogan straight up say, hey, as an absolute expert, I recommend that you do not take the vaccine. As a matter of fact, if you are getting your medical advice from Joe Rogan, there is something legitimately wrong with you, because I don't think anyone listens to the Joe Rogan Experience thinking that this man is some sort of medical expert or medical professional by any means necessary.
When I say something stupid, I'm not thinking about what I'm going to say before I say it. I'm just saying it. Again, I'm not a doctor. I'm a fucking moron. And I'm a cage fighting commentator who's a dirty stand-up comedian. I'm not a respected source of information, even for me.
Most people just like listening to him because he is a great conversationalist. Now, that didn't stop these 300 medical experts that urged Spotify to take action against the streaming platform's most popular podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience. Now, the problem is apparently Joe Rogan is broadcasting misinformation, particularly regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. This open letter was signed by 270 professors, scientists, doctors, and healthcare workers. Writers criticized a controversial episode featuring Dr. Robert Malone, who went on Rogan's show to promote an unfounded theory taking root online, suggesting that millions of people have been hypnotized into believing mainstream ideas about the ongoing pandemic. So before I read this letter to you guys, I'm going to let you know, once again, I did not listen to this episode, so I can't give my direct commentary on that particular episode, but here is what the letter says. On December 31st, 2021, The Joe Rogan Experience, a Spotify exclusive podcast, uploaded a highly controversial episode featuring guest Dr. Robert Malone. The episode has been criticized for promoting baseless conspiracy theories, and The Joe Rogan Experience has a concerning history of broadcasting misinformation, particularly regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. By allowing the propagation of false and societally harmful assertions, Spotify is enabling its hosted media to damage public trust in scientific research and sow doubt into the credibility of data-driven guidance offered by medical professionals. JRE number 1757 is not the only transgression to occur on the Spotify platform, but a relevant example of the platform's failure to mitigate the damage it is causing. We are a coalition of scientists, medical professionals, professors, and science communicators spanning a wide range of fields such as microbiology, epidemiology, and neuroscience, and we are calling on Spotify to take action against the mass misinformation events which continue to occur on its platform. With an estimated 11 million listeners per episode, JRE is the world's largest podcast and has tremendous influence. Though Spotify has a responsibility to mitigate the spread of misinformation on its platform, the company presently has no misinformation policy. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, Joe Rogan has repeatedly spread misleading and false claims on his podcast, provoking distrust in science and medicine. He has discouraged vaccination in young people and children, incorrectly claimed that mRNA vaccines are gene therapy, promoted off-label use of ivermectin to treat COVID-19 contrary to FDA warnings, and spread a number of unsubstantiated conspiracy theories. In this episode, Rogan hosted Dr. Robert Malone, who was suspended from Twitter for spreading misinformation about COVID-19. Dr. Malone used the JRE platform to further promote numerous baseless claims, including several falsehoods about COVID-19 vaccines and an unfounded theory that societal leaders have hypnotized the public. Many of these statements have already been discredited. Notably, Dr. Malone is one of two JRE guests who has compared pandemic policies to the Holocaust. These actions are not only objectionable and offensive, but also medically and culturally dangerous. The average age of JRE listeners is 24 years old, and according to data from Washington State, unvaccinated 12 to 34-year-olds are 12 times more likely to be hospitalized with COVID than those who are fully vaccinated. Dr. Malone's interview has reached many tens of millions of listeners vulnerable to predatory medical misinformation. Mass misinformation events of this scale have extraordinarily dangerous ramifications. As scientists, we face backlash and resistance as the public grows to distrust our research and expertise. As educators and science communicators, we are tasked with repairing the public's damaged understanding of science and medicine, and as physicians, we bear the arduous weight of a pandemic that has stretched our medical systems to their limits and only stands to be exasperated by the anti-vaccination sentiment woven into this and other episodes of Joe Rogan's podcast. This is not only a scientific or medical concern, it is a sociological issue of devastating proportions, and Spotify is responsible for allowing this activity to thrive on its platform. We, the undersigned nurses, scientists, and educators, thus call on Spotify to immediately establish a clear and public policy to moderate misinformation on its platform. Signed, a bunch of doctors and scientists. This is a very interesting situation because Joe Rogan now has a distrust of the government as a result of his experience during the COVID-19 pandemic, which I can't necessarily blame him because naturally human beings are very skeptical in nature. And here comes the basic argument. Joe Rogan has all this power and influence. Spotify made probably their biggest investment in any creator when they brought Joe Rogan onto their platform and signed him to an exclusive contract. One of the details in his contract was the fact that Spotify couldn't meddle with his show.
Yeah. But the Spotify people have been great. They literally said, we don't want to do anything. We want you to just do what you're doing.
So if Spotify began to censor Joe Rogan, then they'd probably get into issues legally with Joe Rogan himself. So it's a very difficult situation, man, and it's understandable that if you are in this industry, if you're a doctor, a nurse, or a scientist, you would feel very undermined if there was a man that just went and completely discredited your work just based off of him being a skeptic of the government. But at the same time, at the end of the day, if 24-year-olds are listening to Joe Rogan for their medical advice and they're not getting vaccinated, then that's the risk that they take. I always had the stance that we've been in this pandemic for almost 2 years. We've had multiple different strains. Every single day I'm hearing something about a brand new super strain that's coming out. I personally believe that at one point or another, we're all going to get COVID. Each and every human being on this earth will probably get COVID at least once in their lifetime. And if you get vaccinated, then the chances of you dying are slim to none. And if you don't get vaccinated, there might be a greater chance of you dying from it. It could potentially not even be a problem if you are young and you are healthy, but that's the risk that you take if you are that skeptical about getting a vaccine to the point that you are risking a greater chance of death. That's my take on the matter. I'm really interested to see how this unfolds eventually. I haven't listened to that episode with Dr. Robert Malone, but personally, when I listen to Joe Rogan giving his take on vaccination, I just think that this man had a very bad experience in California over the past 2 years, and as a result, he is very skeptical of the government knowing what they are doing. And in his defense, man, when California shut down restaurants during the middle of the pandemic and ruined multiple small businesses for absolutely no reason whatsoever, and then Gavin Newsom went into a party without a mask, that's when I became a little skeptical myself. Although I must admit, I myself am vaccinated. So let me know in the comment section down below what you guys think about all this, man. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.